So welcome everybody to tonight's study session for Prior Lake Savage Area School. I just want to let everyone know Director Prince will be here in a few minutes, and then we'll have a full slate of board directors. Tonight we do not have any speakers for public forum, and so that sends us right to our purpose and agenda. And I'll hand it off to you, Dr. Thomas.
Thank you, Chair Crosby, Board of Directors. Tonight, our work sessions, as always, are designed for us to be able to have deeper conversations around key topics. And tonight we've got two primary topics that we'll be discussing tonight, roughly about an hour or so each. We have our quarterly academic report, and with that is going to be a lot of the data that you've seen, you have seen, but we're going to go into a couple of different areas, but also have more discussion on the strategy and what's happening in our schools, both from an elementary and secondary standpoint. We'll have an enrollment and final budget update for the board, as well as having a discussion around our 5-year forecasting model that we've just been engaging in. And then we have a series of proclamations that we'll be covering this evening. So looking forward to the discussion tonight.
Thank you. We do work in our district governance and policy work. We work from our board working document that we reference. And tonight we're referencing our district policy review. We have some policies at the end of our agenda that we'll be discussing that are coming forward via policy committee. And then the other piece noted in this document is the World Best Workforce Report, which we're touching on, but we'll have a formal introduction of that at the November, formal review of that at the November session. However, the quarterly academic report is also a piece of that data review. So oversight and operations, we'll begin our discussion with the quarterly academic report. We've got Director Edwards and Director Zumbush and some principals and maybe teachers here to give us some information on that and have a discussion.
Yeah, thanks, Chair Crosby. We're going to start off by doing a quick review on some of the data. As I shared earlier, a lot of the data, many of you that were at the back to school saw. We expanded some of that when I did the State of the District report several weeks ago. And like I said, tonight we'll focus more so on the conversation as a result of the data. And as you've heard me say a lot, that data doesn't give us answers, it gives us better opportunities to have questions. And so tonight you'll be hearing from some of our building administration as well as some of our teachers on the types of questions that they've been grappling with and engaging in through those early release times that we have built into our calendar, and how that's framing some of the instructional practices at the school level. And I think it'll be a great way for you all to understand how these numbers inform our practice on a day-to-day basis. And so we'll start off with Jenny Zumbush to walk us through some of the data, and then I'll turn it over to Dr. Edwards and a variety of our team to then engage in a deeper conversation on the actions as a result of the data. And you will have that packet. Okay, yeah.
Do we want it projected, or do we just look
I
at
was
it?
curious, I thought we usually have.
Do you want it projected?
Yeah,
Yeah.
could we, please?
Thank you, Martha.
It'll be a minute, so if you want
You can start. And then
You can start.
Okay, yeah, so what you have in your packet, pardon me, is our, some longitudinal MCA data from the spring of 2023. Just as a reminder, MCAs happen once a year in the spring. We have quite a bit of a delay before we get the data because it's embargoed through the state for a number of months over the summer. And then it takes a while to kind of get these disaggregated and aggregated results. So what you have is, this is all publicly available data, so it's just screenshots from the Department of Education, but just kind of showing what the results look like overall, but then where are some of those areas where things may be going a little bit more positively and the areas for improvement. So each of the MCA's math, reading, and science are broken down by grade level and by demographic features. So you'll first have race, ethnicity, and those longitudinal trends, and then you'll have specific learning groups like English learners, special ed. FRM is free reduced meals, and then male and female students. You can kind of see, just as a context as you're looking at this data, the groups that are a smaller sample size will be more unstable over time, so you may not have a nice consistent line over time just because, you know, 1 or 2 students in a small sample size will make things jump around a bit. So just if you're looking at some of those smaller subgroups, that might be part of what you're seeing there with that trend line. It's also a bit challenging to look at trend lines now because we know our 2020 and 2021 data was a bit disrupted, but in general, I think to Dr. Thomas's point, it's really giving us some areas where we can zoom in, ask some additional questions, and then really look to our schools to see how they can best respond to some of the things that we're seeing and some of the questions that we have. I also put together in the bottom of the slide deck some comparisons to surrounding districts. These are things that are also publicly available. They're just buried in very complex spreadsheets, but just to give a little bit of a visual of how things have been going over the last couple of years compared to some of our surrounding districts and a few other districts that have been points of conversation throughout the last year or so, at least year that I know of. So if you can kind of see how things compare to Minnetonka, Lakeville, Burnsville, Eastern Carver County Schools, and Shakopee.
Thank you. Do we want to, Dr. Edwards, do we want to continue with some presenting or
we're
keep the conversation going?
keep the conversation going. We're pulling up the data right now. We'll get to that screen, I think, to see if there's any particular slides that anybody has any particular question, but I think we can jump right into talking more contextually about the continuous improvement work.
Okay. Yeah.
All right, and we can have them available for reference if there's
Yeah.
something that comes up. So, yeah, thank you for that. Definitely want to, as we look at our work around MCA results, has been mentioned multiple times here, we obviously know that that's a data point. And we've been really focusing, and this is not new to this year, but I want to call attention to the last 2 early releases, well, one coming up this week on Wednesday, that we have been utilizing that real-time data to look at some of our adjustments that we want to make as we, and I'll have some teachers and principals come up and talk to that in just a moment. But before we go there, we also want to highlight a couple of more broad things that are underway in implementation. Specifically, for example, we have up on screen right now our MCA math results. And as you all recall, we recently adopted back in April because of the trend data that we are showing here right now on screen, that our math results were not going in the direction we wanted them to go. And so we have spent time over the last year and a half studying, coming into this school year, engaged in a pilot to make sure that we had the best resources available. And last spring, as you recall as a board, you adopted our math curriculum bridges at the elementary level. And we are in wrapping up, just coming to the conclusion of our first 2 months of implementation with that. And I'll be bringing Paxton Heen, one of our elementary teachers, up here to speak a little bit about that in a moment. But just to continue to set the context around that, we have also been engaged in piloting a couple of curricular resources at the middle school level as well to continue this. all of this is related to the standards that have recently changed as well. And looking at how to not only better meet the needs on our annual test results, but throughout time to deepen the experience of our students specific to math and their understanding as math students. And likewise, if we go forward into the presentation, there's reading results, certainly. That is work to come. You may recall that at the conclusion of the legislative session this past May, the READ Act was passed. And the READ Act specifically has some very prescriptive objectives that are going to be coming out per MDE in January, and we'll be beginning to dive in deeply to that with our staff, similar to the math committee that we pulled together and brought forward the recommendation of the Bridges curriculum. We'll be doing similar work this second half of this school year and getting things up and running that legislatively we are required to do, some of which by July 1 of this upcoming year, and then subsequent deadlines that come in the year and a half to follow. So we'll be, again, engaging our teachers and staff in assessing curricular resources. This is a little bit different in the reading in that, and per the legislative READ Act that just was passed in May, there will be actual curriculums that will be identified, and we'll be analyzing those approved curriculums. We anticipate, according to legislation, that we will know that information in January, and then we'll be able to look at that more in detail. And then speaking to the science, just briefly here, we have also standards that are changing, and we're in various stages of implementation along that work. We have at the elementary level, we did adopt the FOSS curriculum, but we have not gone to full implementation of that because we have focused our attention this year with our math curriculum, but we will be moving forward. We did pilot that last year, and because of the nature of the magnitude of the math implementation, we have decided to not bring in FOSS, but we will yet for all teachers, because all classroom teachers at the elementary level are implementing Bridges. We will be doing science, new curriculum starting next year at the elementary level. We are at the middle school level, there was a significant change in the standards, which resulted in actually a shifting not only of practices, and that's where I'm going to have a high school science teacher come and talk a little bit about that work here in a moment, but also we have had the changing of actual content where specifically at the middle school level, the content was previously physical science, it is now earth science, and we're in year 2 of that standards change. That was a phase-in change. This year we're continuing life science at the 7th grade, and next year we'll be bringing physical science to the 8th grade, which then feeds into the 9th grade. But more importantly, arguably, than the actual content of those specific sciences are the teaching practices. And again, I'll be bringing up high school science teacher Ben Meacham to speak about that. So with that, I'd like to invite those two individuals to come forward to come and share some of their work. We'll pull a couple chairs in for Ben and Paxton. We'll pull one of them over. We'll pull one over here. We'll let them sit over there, right? Oh. You good?
Yeah.
You right?
One come over there?
Yeah, I'll pull one over. I'll pull them for us. Yeah.
Anybody else comes over here?
Come on over here. So I want to introduce Paxton Heen is a 3rd grade teacher at Jeffers Pond, and she's part of the Teaching and Learning Advisory Committee. and she's the elementary teacher representative to that committee, has been now, this is your third year in that role. And just want her, she did share at the most recent October Teaching and Learning Advisory a little bit about how the implementation is going. And she took us back at that meeting to the summer work and now the implementation work. So I want to give her a chance to share a little bit about it.
Yeah. So I guess this past summer, we were engaged in a 2-day training where we really got to learn about the layout of bridges and kind of the components and how it all goes together. Really, really informational and hands-on to get to be touching all of the curriculum and the things that we need to be able to teach every day. We're really grateful for all of the time we were given to get our supplies and things ready before the year started. And then fast forward to, well, I guess we most recently just had our last PD day. That was really, really helpful. We were given time to look at our next unit assessment and kind of backwards map, look at the assessment, the skills and the things that are going to be assessed and pinpoint, where they're coming up in lessons. And then we really did a deeper training, and what I guess I took is more purposeful now, having been in it for about a month and a half now, really truly understanding the 3 main components of bridges: the problems and investigations, the workplace stations, and then the number corner component that goes with it. In my classroom, the things I'm seeing really truly are amazing. The engagement is really, really high. The number sense and just the strategies that the kids are talking about and how they're able to write and explain their thinking has been really, really fun to watch kind of come to life. And just the kiddos' conceptual understanding of everything at this point in the school year has been really rewarding, and I think really cool for them to, with our training, we're kind of seeing how the number corner component is coming in with our units. So for example, our September number corner in 3rd grade was all about multiplication and multiplication models, and now it's all making sense now because in Unit 2 we're doing an introduction to multiplication. So those kiddos were exposed to some of those big components and ideas. And then starting today is when I kicked off that unit, so it's not brand new for them. They've been exposed to it, but yeah, overall, it's going really well. It's very hands-on in real life, and they're very engaged, and they're talking, and their partners, their workplaces, and the different components of it.
And just to remind folks, when we did move forward with the adoption back in April of last spring, we came back to you with a reminder of what our process was, and if you recall, much of that was around some of the things that Paxton just shared about the level of engagement, increasing engagement, as well as depth of understanding, conceptual understanding, and I think that's a lot of what we're seeing thus far in the implementation is that students are having a deeper understanding, and the repeat. One of the things that I've heard from the teachers at most recent early release day conversations is around an acknowledgement or a recognition of we don't, this isn't our last time working at this particular math concept. It's going to repeat itself, and we don't expect mastery at this point. That's one of the things that I've heard many conversations from teachers around.
Yeah, and we, at our first early release, we kind of looked at Jeffers anyway, the connection between like our fast bridge skills and scores to the bridges and kind of where it was coming in Unit 1, Unit 2, and Unit 3. And so that was helpful at that moment because at that point we hadn't really looked ahead. We're kind of living the day in and day out. But it was very interesting to see, the different skills that are just still developing, and it's okay if it's not mastered at the end of a unit because we know that it's going to come back in that very purposeful and intentional way in the curriculum.
And once again, we have a early release day coming up this week on Wednesday, and one of the things that's coming on the heels of that for the elementaries is conferences coming up here in mid-November, and so an opportunity to make sure that our teachers are prepared, given that they've just been implementing a new curriculum for a few months here, for a couple of months, not even completely yet, that they will be prepared to help parents understand. We actually have a math curriculum night coming up next week as well, and with the adoption of new approaches to teaching math, I think important to make sure that our parents understand how that looks different, how it's looking different in the classroom, and what they're hearing from their students as they come home. And actually, at Teaching and Learning Advisory, we had a conversation around this, and some parents shared that experience that they were having, and how it is different. So looking forward to that opportunity to continue as we deepen our understanding of it and move forward with our curriculum.
If I may, Dr. Edwards, and then just kind of maybe pause for any kind of check-in questions here, but one of the things, I will say that math is one of those content areas that doesn't always drive mass excitement. This is nothing against math teachers or math content, I'm gonna be very clear about that. But it's not like art or PE or something like that where kids are kind of engaged in a very different, unique way, but I will tell you, every classroom that I've observed, and I've been very intentional at elementaries to find ways to observe what's happening at that math block. There hasn't been a time where kids have not really kind of run to kind of share what's happening with regards to their learning with math. Now, I have to be honest with you, that's not the normal thing that I have seen over my career. Just last week at Glendale, having kids run up and talk about what they're doing, but also they're engaged in strategy conversations. Now, granted, this was 5th grade, so they were a little bit higher in terms of their ability to engage at an intellectual level with strategy, but I've seen it as low as our 2nd graders as well. And just thinking about two extremes that are vivid in my mind. And so when we look at the results that we've seen with some of the trend that's been happening, and yes, COVID was impactful, but prior to COVID, let's be honest with ourselves, right? We've seen information that shows, hey, the trend is not going in the direction that we want to go, which is why we engaged in this a couple of years ago to adopt this new curriculum, because it was at scale. So that's not an individual student, that's not an individual classroom or a school, that's a system-wide approach that we needed to take. And so through the pilot, and we shared this a little bit, again, not to say that it's causation, because usually you see a dip with a new curriculum, but the students engaged in that pilot did have relatively higher MCA scores last spring compared to those who were not as part of that pilot. Now, we won't say that we can cascade that all the way throughout, but it's just a good early indicator of what we can see when we have a curriculum that isn't focused on a rote approach of memorization, regurgitating facts, etc., but it's really getting into that thinking and speaking math. How do we teach them to be mathematicians at heart? That's a fundamentally different approach. And I know our parents are having a reaction to that because it is not how many of us grew up learning math. But if we're looking at a more organic way of learning that can be interdisciplinary, going exclusively into math with a rote approach is not going to give us that compounding learning effect that this curriculum is actually starting to seed. So I'm very hopeful and very pleased to see early on what our teachers are doing in the classrooms, what our paraprofessionals are doing in some of those small group support sessions as well, that are going to help interrupt the trajectory that we've seen for the past several years. So I just want to add that context to it from where I plug in with our teachers. So would pause here to open up some conversation around some of the math conversations.
Because that was a great segue to my introduction to Ben and science. So hopefully.
Can I ask a question about the math? Is this okay time?
Let's do it.
Paxton, thank you so much for coming tonight and explaining things, because I know you did the pilot and then you did all of the other things and implementing it. So with this new curriculum, there's the math stations that you talk about and the hands-on part of it that you seem to really like and the kids really respond to. Are they able to do that kind of thing when they take, so once spring rolls around again and they take another MCA, are they able to, does it translate? Are they able to use like their hands-on and their math stations to take a test? Because I'm thinking of it, I love the new Bridges, speaking as a parent, I'm loving it with my son who's in 4th grade now. And he likes it, I like it as a parent. Does that translate? Do you see that translating to an MCA where you're just kind of filling in different things? Are they able to use the hands-on
Yeah.
stuff?
I guess in my experience thus far, the kiddos and just so far what they're able to translate from the strategies they're using in workplaces would definitely correlate to that MCA, and just how they're able to show their work. I think about just the 2-digit by 2-digit addition we just got done doing, the kids drawing number lines, the kids that were lining up the standard algorithm and doing that way, and the multiple ways they can show their thinking. As far as the hands-on goes, the tools that they maybe have on the MCA is the only thing that they can use, rather than just what they can write down themselves, I guess, would be my best answer. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, I would say I would agree with that, and I would echo and point of emphasis around the math thinking process that I think we believe is going to result in higher performance. And it's not just about the MCA, certainly it is a piece, but over time, the depth of understanding and the way that this curriculum, and frankly, it aligns with the vision that we set out for math, is to create students who are thinking and explaining their thinking and having opportunity to engage with classmates around and teachers asking, okay, that's a different way of getting there. How did you get there? And that is an approach that we are taking up through the system and into the secondary level. So students over time, I think, will definitely have a greater depth of understanding, specifically on that assessment, able to use the same tools, possibly not, but their understanding should increase.
And you noted, I think, that this, and you did as well, that this is showing up in the FastBridge results in the short term, correct?
It did with our pilot groups last year.
That's what I mean.
Yep, it did with our pilot groups. But again, once we get more deeply into it, and students have had multiple years of this experience, I think that's what I was.
More experience.
Yep, and I think that's what I was trying to speak to there, is the multiple years of this way of doing math, different than the traditional way of doing math.
And to Director Olsted's point, and forgive me, I think I said MCAs when I meant FastBridge earlier, but FastBridge and the unit assessments that you heard Paxton speak of, those have a greater correlation because they're in time so that you can make those adjustments. And I think that's the more critical piece, because FastBridge is correlated to MCA outcomes. So if what we are assessing in our unit assessments and when we do our FastBridge, those two are in sync with one another, and again, by default, that cascades up then to our MCA performance. So I think there's a better alignment there than we've had in the past, clearly.
I have a question. So thank you for your time and for addressing the elementary program. I'm really curious to hear more about the middle school program and particularly the math program. And I know we have a slide that's dedicated particularly to the high school. And I think when you go back to the years of like 2015 and 16, I think one consistent thing that stood out to me is that our scores from elementary to middle to high school were very consistent. We were in the 78 to 75% proficiency range across the board. So we're not seeing this higher level of proficiency at the elementary schools, and then when we get to middle, it dips, and when we get to high school, it dips further. So how are we addressing the curriculum in both the middle school and particularly the high school where our proficiency rates are 45%?
Yeah, so we are definitely engaged in that work, and I mentioned earlier that we are piloting a curricular resource this fall.
What is
right
the name
now.
of that we're piloting?
CPM is the curriculum that we're piloting at the middle schools. We have 2 7th grade and 2 8th grade classrooms, and we also have a 6th grade classroom. Actually, our SAGE students are engaged in that pilot. The 5th grade SAGE students are engaged in that because they're doing a 6th grade math experience this year. So that we are seeing definite similarities to the experience thus far, similarities to the Bridges curriculum and the approaches, the instructional strategies. We have engaged our middle and high school teachers this past year and continuing to do that. An approach, instructional strategies approach aligned with that vision I spoke of earlier, building the depth of understanding, called Building Thinking Classrooms, is instructional strategies. One instructional strategy that we're working to increase. Again, we are also, and we'll be sharing this with the Teaching and Learning Advisory, actually later this month in a couple of weeks, about a course sequencing that we are looking at the middle and high school around increased depth of understanding. Algebra 1 specifically is a foundational course, foundational skills, and we're looking at how do we ensure that students have either in 8th or in 9th grade that deep foundational understanding of algebra so that they can be successful at their later courses. And we're really looking at that, and we're going to actually be sharing some information with the Teaching and Learning Advisory coming up in a couple of weeks, and then planning to put that forward for the upcoming school year.
Yeah.
So is there going to be a change of curriculum in the high school, or a change of like how the curriculum is addressed, like maybe the time spent on it?
Yep.
Or
Yeah, specific to algebra, one of the key components, the 8th grade math standards call for linear algebra. The traditional algebra course that all of us around the table know as Algebra 1 includes linear as well as quadratics. And we are finding that we need to go deeper in the students' experience so that they have that much more solid foundational understanding, while at the same time recognizing that we have students at different levels ready for different levels of that understanding. So different on-ramp and off-ramp opportunities in 8th, 9th, and 10th grade and into the junior, senior year. So that's part of that, again, deepening that understanding of math, of the core concepts so that they can be successful later on.
Yeah, I would say if I may, the general strategy around thinking classrooms is going to be key, because that's applicable to any content area. That's something I think we see an opportunity to support our staff around their development of that knowledge and implementing that. To your question, Director Atkinson, around curriculum, not necessarily curriculum, but the sequence, as you heard Dr. Edwards speak to. What we're finding is that there's an academic promotion of kids through a kind of a more linear pathway that may not be aligned to their skills and ability, and they're kind of forced down that path. And they're finding themselves not to be successful, and to what Dan just said, there's no off-ramp. And by the time they realize they may be on the wrong path, that's where we see the significant academic regression. That's where we see the, I want to give up, I want to drop, that mindset takes over. So what research shows is that, one of our greatest predictors for long-term math success is that 8th grade algebra score. So we want to make sure that we solidify that first and foremost, and create that entrance and that entrance and exit option for students right then and there, so we can compound with a deeper level of learning at that foundational year that will carry them through. And I want to be very clear too, and we're kind of foreshadowing a little bit into our November conversation with World's Best Workforce, but kids still have to graduate with higher levels of math if they want to globally compete. And so we want to make sure that kids that don't take a pathway that gets them through advanced calculus, that doesn't mean that this track is not going to prepare them for life or college or anything else. They are still they can still graduate up to statistics and pre-calc as well. And that is a viable place to end your K-12 math career. So we want to make sure that kids don't feel bad, for lack of a better term, for not taking an aggressive approach that's a single lane for us right now. And so I think far too often we just expect every kid's going to be a calculus kid. That's not the case. And so I think this sequencing is going to be the key to how we differentiate math at the high school level.
Was there how, when you go back and look at 2015 and 16, when our proficiency rates were 73%, was there a major change in the sequencing that created the change? I mean, and that's what I'm trying to understand, like, is that, or were there other factors that have changed? And, I mean, it could go back to people who've been here longer, Dan Edwards, Director France, to answer that question.
I would say that there were a variety of factors. We did make some adjustments, and our offering of leveling at the middle school level created a lack of depth of understanding. And I think that's what we're going to be coming back to, is ensuring that depth of understanding for all students is deep in 6th and 7th grade specifically. Again, we're foreshadowing a lot here, but that's where we're headed, to ensure that understanding for all, so that they can access later in their sequence, of course, level of course that's appropriate for their current understanding.
And that's where you definitely see it drop off. You'll see the elementaries are right up here, and then all of a sudden you go to middle and it drops down, so.
I have a question in here, because I'm on track with what you just said, Dr. Edwards, and also I've tutored math for Prior Lake students. And what you just said about the FAST portion, there has been, and I saw it grow for the past, I don't know how many years, even before I got on the board, of this need to get through calc. And the tutoring has clearly shown that if the kids didn't get the elementary school correctly, but they got through it with a B or so, that's still 20% of the math understanding that were missed, and they were pushed forward on that linear scale. So that depth of understanding and the speed, but also trying to make it so that we had semester-based versions of these math also pushed them through very, very quickly. By the time they got into high school and they were, there's a lot of pressure from parents even to get through AP Calc 1 and 2, or 1 and 2 in one semester and 3 and 4 in another. And trying to replicate what happens at the college level at a high school level really does push them way too fast. And what they do is they hit a wall. That's the way I describe it, is that you get to them and you're trying to tutor them on derivatives. They didn't understand the algebra to begin with. They didn't understand the geometry. They didn't understand the trig. And a lot of them get totally lost in pre-calc. It's all memorization. It's rote memorization of formulas. And that goes to the speed and the push for the grades. So they memorize what needs to happen on the test. They don't really understand the concepts. And then they get to the point where they get so frustrated, they just stop trying. And that's where I see the drop, but I personally saw it. So that emphasis on going slower and more in depth, and you're gonna have some students who may get bored with that or slower, but there's always ways with the interactive math and with the new bridges thing that I absolutely love. I'm with Jessica, it's the interactive, it's the understanding, it's the application of it that gives more meaning to it. And if we can continue that through, it's gonna take about a year per grade level to see those changes actually occur as it starts to regurgitate itself. But if we can do that, I think we're gonna see it all of a sudden shoot high. And that's what I look forward to. But also, I think it's upon all of us to really emphasize that the most important part about this isn't the grade or whether they can get an AP credit, it's actually learning. And that's what got lost somewhere along the way. So if they learn it, they may not get the grades right away, they may not get the test scores right away, but if they really learn it, they're actually going to be able to apply that, so it will eventually come. It'll come a lot easier to them. So they don't get frustrated, and they won't hate math. They won't, and the same thing happens with science that we're gonna go through in a little bit, because it's all building blocks. You can't partially learn something just to get through and get a good grade and then all of a sudden get pushed forward, because you hit that wall.
Yeah.
So I have another question. Is it possible to go back and survey teachers who've been here for 10 years and find out more information about their experience, particularly in the high school, with the math, the science, and the reading, and what was being done back in 2015 and 16 when we were at 80% proficiency levels, and what we're doing differently now. And I'm not talking specific to curriculum, I'm talking more about whether it's class structure or consistency of teachers or scheduling or policies of that kind. I'm just curious, I'm just asking a question. Because when you think
Yeah,
about the
I
whole
like
learning
the-
experience.
I like the interest, I
You know
like
what I
the
mean?
curiosity, I think we all feel that way.
Because it's not just
What I-
about the score,
Yeah.
it's about the full experience
It
to be
is,
able to
it's
achieve
about
the
the
score.
authentic learning.
Yeah.
But what I wanted, when you started this conversation, I think what you said was that this whole math piece is, for the secondary, is coming into teaching and learning soon.
Yes.
And so let's pause on that in the interest of time,
Yep.
if we're
Yep.
okay with that.
Yep.
And move into the science piece, and knowing that that's gonna be coming to the table in the teaching and learning.
Yeah, and
I
I'll
mean,
just,
if you wanted to.
yeah, I would agree, but I'll
I
just
wanna
share,
be like-
because in that, just for the sake, because not everybody's at teaching and learning advisory
Yeah.
here,
Yeah.
for the sake of that, what we are coming forward with is something that had all teachers involved in conversations and a subgroup of high school and middle school teachers coming together in recent weeks to land the plane, so to speak, and say, this is what, and it is based upon all of those things. So definitely, we had teachers around this conversation, and they were very much a part of owning this direction. So I'll speak to that more in detail, but I think we have segued a couple of
I
times.
have a question regarding the math, if I
Sure.
can. I'm curious about any gap created, so with the new curriculum in the elementary school, I love the positivity around it, the experience so far, even hearing from you, Jessica. But I'm assuming that there is a gap in, like you stated, from how parents learned. And so that gap of parents being able to support their students at home. And so I'm wondering how the district is going to address that gap, because the supplemental support that a student gets at home greatly increases their.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, so, can I jump in?
Yeah, go for it. Yep.
So this is something that we've been hearing about, and we actually discussed it as well at our recent TNL committee. And, so two things. One, Dan mentioned the curriculum night that's coming forward, that we're inviting families to come in so we can kind of hand walk some folks through and put eyes and really hands-on manipulatives, the content itself. In addition to that, Bridges has an at-home companion component for parents, so that there's that teaching aspect for parents and how we build their skill set in the home environments. Because not every parent can come out to the curriculum night, not every parent, can, have the one-on-one conference or attend whatever. So that's also built into the actual Bridges, so that we're building that support system in the adult at home, while we're also supporting the student in the classroom. And then through our conversations with, through conferences, through phone calls, through emails, whatever, that we connect with our families on an individual basis as well. So that's one thing I know that our parents have also appreciated, the Parent Academy, or whatever it might be called, component to the curriculum.
So that's all coming in the next couple of weeks, and we'll continue. We've talked about having not just this one and done math curriculum night this fall here next week, but to have another one, and possibly two more before the end of the school year after this.
Well, and just being mindful, I think when I'm just thinking about it as a parent, my kids are now outside of that age group, but just being mindful that adding another to do on parents is challenging. And when we're wanting to create partnership with our parents and all of that, it's just, kind of, and I hear that you are very mindful of that, so, and I appreciate that, but I think that's where I'm kind of setting as, when we did have back 2015, 2016, and we look at this decline, that it's not, we can't place blame of COVID on it, I don't even want to call it a fear, but my fear is that if we are changing curriculum due to a continuous decline, I guess a fear would be that placing another burden on parents to be support, all of those kind of things is playing in. that we're not shooting ourselves in the foot, if that
I'm
makes
gonna ask
sense.
Paxton to speak to
Yeah.
that, because we've had this conversation.
I bet you have.
So
I bet you
Bridges
have.
has the home connection link that we have not really done anything with thus far, just knowing it's brand new and teachers are still getting to know it. So as of now, nothing is expected at home. I personally have been pushing out, they have like different unit letters kind of explaining what we're learning, so there's that information for parents. And then for the first time, I did send a pre-assessment home for kind of an optional study guide last week. And I got some good parent feedback of, hey, this was really nice to see, all this, because this test is 4 pages long versus what they used to be, and it's very different thinking and explaining. So I did get good feedback on them, but again, it was optional. So, I hope to talk about that optional, keeping those things going, because some parents are wanting to continue those conversations with their kids, but knowing too that, there's a lot going on, and it is a big change for parents as well, so not expecting it necessarily.
Yeah, I think that's the key, not expecting it. And that's one of the things that, because if we're truly gonna engage in this approach, it needs to be under the direction of the facilitation of the teacher, seeing these students interacting and having conversations at a deeper level with their classmates. That is really the best way to implement and to see how a student is grasping that depth of understanding and able to articulate that and share that with their classmates.
And maybe just another question, and I don't expect you to know the answer, but I know you've been in education for a long time. There's many of you here that have been in education for a long time. I'm wondering if there, in history, has been a real big change in, let's just say, math curriculum, that we have gone through that and people did fine. We went through the,
Yeah,
you know what I
Director
mean?
Bullion, all the time.
All the time, okay.
All the time, I hate to say it. Standards change, publishing companies get aware of new standards, they chase the standards, they push out new curriculum. We know as we learn more through human development and human learning, with more brain research and science, how we thought people learned in the 70s is not the same as what we know people learn in the 2023. So curriculum is always changing, and I want to be clear about something. Curriculum is a tool. These two are the source.
Yeah.
And it's a tool they use. And so, honestly, we can say that getting quality teachers, getting quality para support in classrooms is the #1 predictor of student success. We see all the research behind that. That goes first. The tools that they carry, that they don't always control. And so as long as we have a great teacher, great paraprofessionals in the classroom for support, they'll figure out how to manipulate and utilize any tool given to them. Okay. And so I want to assure the board, as we're talking about with ELA coming up and science standards that are changing, it'll be another 10 years and another big wave is going to come through that's going to change what we are excited about today. So that is unfortunately the cycle of education, which is not just unique to PLSAS. It's all over the place. So
I want to clarify something because Director Bullion asked a question about putting more, on parents already. But before that question was asked, if I understood it correctly, I heard you guys to say, which as a former parent, that one of the purposes of having the parent instruction was also to educate parents that the way you may have learned it in school and way your other kids may have learned it is now changing. And so when parents see the homework coming home or when they see the curriculum coming home, it's like, well, this isn't how we did it, and they don't get it. So just giving that introduction, so you're not really putting more on them, you're just explaining to them.
It's not.
It's different.
And you're right, Director Franz, and I'll be the first one to admit my guilt as a parent, and I don't know what's worse, a preacher's kid or a principal's kid. My kids, they had it, having 2 educators as parents, but I can vividly recall and getting the slap on the hand from my wife about helping our kids with math which was contradictory to how they were teaching it at that time. And I wish I could rewind that tape, because it was good learning for me, because I was trying to apply my prior knowledge and how I've learned it to help my kid get the answer. And I can't stress enough what we know about brain science, what we know about human behavior and learning. Answers aren't going to drive learning. Learning will drive learning. And so the focus is there. And so our ask to parents, and the greatest gift parents can give to their kids right now with any new curriculum is patience and in time of support. Because the moment I did that, my daughter found the easy way of getting to the end. And now she can't transfer the learning to another discipline. She just knows that answer. And so I think, again, my wife will love me for saying that. But, it was just one of those aha moments. And I think that's the shift that we're in. So yes, we have the component for parent support. We know that we're going to have to bring parents along in this learning journey, because students do well when schools and homes are aligned, for their support. And so it'll be a matter of time, but parents will understand, yep, I get it now, I see it. And again, our staff and our schools, classrooms, they will support our parents. They're not going to say, now go do your job, parent.
I'm grateful that we're having a curriculum night. I know other districts are doing that as well, so I thank you for putting that on the calendar. I think that's going to be great.
And what I'll say to those who are considering coming to that, you'll have a different experience. I was working with our team that's putting it together. We're going to engage parents in a similar manner to how we're engaging students. It's not going to be a sit and get. So I'll leave it at that.
Spoiler alert.
Yep, spoiler alert here. And I'll segue to Ben. Ben Meacham is a chemistry teacher primarily at the high school. He's been heavily involved in the work with his colleagues around the changing standards in science and the inquiry-based approach, aligned with some of this building thinking classrooms approach. And I won't steal much more thunder. I'll let you share some of that, Ben.
Yeah, I hope there's as much excitement for science as there is. Okay, so the most concrete way I can think about approaching it is this. As often as the standards have changed in the past in science at the secondary level, it's always been content, and then sort of in the background were these practices, science and engineering practices. And from a teacher's point of view, we kind of like glossed over the practices and we're like, yeah, we do them, but we're really focused on the content. The content is what we love. We're good at it, blah, blah. That is where sort of the revolutionary change has taken place with respect to the standards, going back to 2013 with the next generation science standards that Minnesota doesn't call NGSS, but it's a combination of NGSS and a framework for K-12 science education. It's kind of a hybrid that we just call Minnesota State Science Standards, which is now this merging of content and science practices, where it's not we can no longer just focus on the content. Like, that's not even an option. It's not an option because there is no such standard that exists anymore that is just content. It is naturally infused with science practices, content, and then something they call cross-cutting concepts. But we'll just focus on the practices and content. So they're one and the same. And so those science practices, there's 7 of them. But they're things that are widely attributable to any field of science: analyzing and interpreting data, asking questions, engaging in argument from evidence, creating explanations, developing models, yada yada, stuff like that. The most difficult part of it is it's twofold. How do teachers teach skills? Which sounds kind of like, what do you mean? But it's for the longest time we've always taught just like the content, and then the skills are kind of like in there, like embedded, so to speak, but they're not emphasized. But now we are placing a spotlight on skills. So for example, a skill, asking questions, right? Anybody can ask questions, but what does it mean to ask a good scientific question? Something that could lead to an experiment, for example. So there's multitude of ways about going about this, but one of the ways that we've, the whole science department at the high school has started to revolve around is something you could call phenomena-based instruction, inquiry-based. It has a variety of names, but you and I were primarily taught via a concepts to data approach. In other words, the teacher knew the concept that they wanted to communicate, and then we would collect data to basically confirm that concept or to apply it in a different scenario. And what we're trying to do now is essentially flip that and say, here's data, okay? We've collected that data, or I'm showing you this video. Look at this train car collapsing. What questions do you have? And we're starting to recognize that the prior knowledge that students come in with really matters. And it's something, again, we knew that, but at the same time, we didn't do anything necessarily within the curriculum to account for that or to back that up. And so we'll say, well, what questions do you currently have, right? And then we go through those questions one by one. Okay, what questions could we actually investigate given the tools and stuff that we have? And so we design experiments from scratch. And we know in the back of our minds the path that we want to go, so we kind of guide them down that path. And we created an experiment that is customized to our tools, to our available resources, to the path that I know in the back of my mind we want to go down. That then generates data, which then generates a concept. That concept was created by us via the data that we collected, right? Not the other way around. And so we now have ownership over the concept because we created it. Now we could create a graph of mass versus volume and say, hey, by the way, this slope is mass over volume. That's called density. Now we could call it whatever we want, but if we want to communicate with the larger world, people call it density, right? And so what we're finding is that the kids are much more positively responding to, especially mathematical ideas. Because I could tell you, like Boyle's law, P1 V1 equals P2 V2. That in that context, it's in the absence of any meaning. But if we flip it and we ask the question, what is the relationship between pressure and volume? Well, how can we design this experiment? And then we design it, and then we actually do the math. Now, by doing the math, what I mean is we analyze and interpret the data, and we use previously learned algebra skills, and we actually generate this equation from the data to say that you didn't have to be a genius to come up with this thing called Boyle's law, or whatever it is. We created it ourselves. Again, we could call it Meacham's law, whatever. But if we want to communicate with the larger world, we call it Boyle's law. So we assign labels and names of things, concepts, to stuff that we have generated in a much more customizable mindset. So that has been a very difficult transition for, I think, all teachers, myself included, because we were trained to be really good at content. We understand the content. We are scientifically literate. They are not. They as in the students. And now to have teachers be like, hold on, like pump the brakes a little bit on the content. Let's place more of a spotlight on the skills that help drive the content and the understanding of the content. And what does that even look like from a lesson point of view? There's been a wide range of, not buy-in, but of just what does that actually look like on a day-to-day basis? But there's been much more of a collective effort from a whole science department mindset to get to that. Visiting schools, having PD sessions on this, things of that nature. In chemistry specifically, to hit kind of both areas, science, we'll say science reasoning and content, we take a measure pre and post. Pre is in beginning of the year, post at the end of the year, something called the American Chemical Society High School Conceptual Chemistry Exam. So that's at the beginning of the year, what do you know from a conceptual point of view? They all bomb the test, unsurprising rather, because they don't know any chemistry yet, right? So then we teach you a bunch of chemistry, skills involved, all that stuff. And then we reassess you again late March or so. And the idea is, how much of what we did, how much of what we did actually had a conceptual impact on their chemistry understanding. This is a nationally, it's not produced by us, it's produced by ACS, American Chemical Society, so it's objective in that. We have normalizing national data that we can compare Prior Lake to national norms, so we're excited to check that out. The other thing is called the CTSR, the Classroom Test of Scientific Reasoning. It's been around since late 70s or so, but it's based on different Piagetian mindsets, formal operational, concrete operational. Yeah, where is a kid in their science reasoning growth? One super surprising finding that we found that's not just at Prior Lake, but it's nationally, is that by the time we graduate kids, they're not formal operational thinkers. And that, at least going back to Piagetian type thinking, that should have happened by the time they're 15. So like, what's going on? That sort of thing. And so we give them a pre and post test as well. And so we want to see, okay, given this newer type of emphasis on skills and thinking and science reasoning, is that having any impact? And fortunately, we have data from 2016 to 2019 when we weren't doing as much of this stuff that we're kind of excited to compare that back to say, like, are we seeing more of a growth? The MCAs for science, they're going to, the MCAs that they have taken, so keep in mind, teachers at the high school level have been working on what does these new standards even mean to me, but then also what does that look like in the classroom on a day-to-day basis? They've been working on trying to perfect that and get that to a place where they feel comfortable for the past, I'd say 3 or 4 years, right? But the MCAs that any student has taken prior to this has not yet reflected those science practices. Now, I don't think it's gonna do it this year, I think it's gonna be next year. Yeah, so next year the MCAs will fundamentally change to the extent that certain questions, well, actually all questions will naturally involve in a multi-dimensional approach to it, where they're gonna have science practices embedded into the question, right? And that is where I'll be super interested to see, okay, given what we've been doing the past 3 or 4 years, has that made an impact? So take that for what it's worth, because yes, you can't throw things back on to COVID solely. But the one thing you can, I don't want to say fall back on, but you can at least adds to the pot, which is teachers have been fundamentally changing their approach to teaching by focusing more on skills and less on just focusing on content. And what you see in the current MCAs or the past MCAs since 2019 or so is an MCA exam that primarily is focused on content. And so it's not super surprising that we see the dip that we see. You take all those things into consideration. Yep.
A couple of observations in general when we consider the MCA scores for math and for science. One of the things I didn't bring up before, and I think historically we've done it, haven't done it recently, but I know a lot of other schools do. Some of them take a whole week before that MCA test and do nothing but take a week out of the normal curriculum in order to test and train to take the MCAs in order to make sure the scores stay as high, but it's not indicative of the actual learning capability of the students. It's more or less a rote memorization. I personally know my kids went through that when they were in school, especially at one of the schools in here, because that's exactly what they did before the MCAs. All the things, which does cause a higher scoring than would be naturally possible if they had practiced their own learning. But being part of the science standards and a little bit of the math standards when they were being created, one of the things that they were emphasizing is experiential learning. And part of the experiential learning they were having a struggle with is the fact of a lot of the testing of the science mentality or the critical thinking mentality had to do with their ability to read and understand the terms. And that's where the breakdown started to happen. Are we testing reading or are we testing science? How are we breaking that down in that experiential learning that is going to happen now with content-based learning that you just described?
So within the context, because I can just speak for chemistry, but the idea should be applicable enough that biology, physics, Science 9, Earth Science could incorporate this. We don't ever start with any vocab. Okay, the vocabulary comes from the data, which then leads to the concept, which then the concept is defined via however we want to define it. In other words, I'm not going to tell you, let's say a vocab word like density, okay? In the past, we'd say things like density is, how much stuff there is in a given amount of space, right? Memorize that, okay? Now, we're like, okay, I know that they need to know density. How would I get them to that point? So substitute density for whatever vocab term, whatever thing you want, but we'll just use that. I want them to measure the mass and volume of a variety of different samples, plotted on a graph, okay? And we notice that it's a linear relationship. It's this straight line, it's the same slope every time, okay? What is slope? You guys remember that in math? Change in y over change in x, okay. What's our y? Mass. What's our x? Volume. All right, mass over volume. When we set mass over volume equal to something, we're finding it's the same number every time. That number is called density, right? So we're doing that for, the approach is, we're doing that for every term, every concept that we would want kids to quote unquote memorize. Not just for purely memorizability, but for applicability. You need to know this concept of density in order to, not just to communicate it in the future, but to use it as a tool to uncover an understanding of future things that we're going to be learning. From a reading point of view, I'd say that's one area that I think we'd all like to improve more on within the science community, where it's like, I personally don't know how to teach kids to read better. And in other words, that's not something I've been trained in, but I do know how to help kids understand vocabulary better, and not just from a memorization point of view, but constructing and understand. The idea is that if I was part of the construction of that concept, I now have I am more likely to remember that concept down the road. One thing that we've been trying to do, we've been experimenting a little bit with, is giving the kids actual data sets. They could just be straight up numbers, but they could also be like, you'd see them in the ACT or in the MCA words where it's describing some kind of scenario, and they have to, what kind of data in here is relevant to the situation, right? That sort of thing. And that's something that we're just, at least in the context of chemistry, just on the cusp of. And so there's been so much change that in the past 3 or 4 years, where we're trying to alter certain things and approach to certain things, where we're flipping so much of it, that from a literacy, from an actual, not a science literacy, but like a literal literacy point of view, that's something that I think, I know, again, I can only speak for myself, but I know I'd like to learn more about, because sometimes I don't know. Is it a reading thing? Are you having trouble with the words? Or is it something, am I assessing what the thing that I'm thinking I'm assessing?
That's something that we're on the cusp of, if I may jump in real quickly around that, in that we are now administering the Fast Bridge at the high school level for all students in 9th and 10th grade in reading and math, which is a new thing for us this fall. And that data, we're just wrapping that up, working with our teachers to understand at our October early release day, we talked about that and why we were doing it. Now we're going to be diving into, okay, what are these results? And I've already heard of some conversations happening at the learning team level where teachers are coming together and saying, oh, I didn't realize that. I sensed that about my student, a particular student in my class. And so, and more to come with, as we move forward with the READ Act implementation that I was referencing earlier, science of reading, and bringing that not only to our elementary level where we talk about our K-3 phonics program, but across our system at all levels. So that's work that's on the horizon.
I have one other question. Sorry, I don't mean to monopolize anyone's time here, but one of the other things that I've noticed, and maybe I'm wrong this year because I haven't paid that much attention to who signed up for what, but, I've been part of the curriculum committee for the first time in a long time either. So, I have noticed that most of the kids, you know, they take their math and science requirements freshman and sophomore year. They try to get them out of the way. As everyone stated, people don't get excited that much. We do want kids to get excited about math and science. However, by the time they get to 11th grade, some of them haven't had math all year. Some of them haven't had to take another science class because they're done with their core curriculum requirements. And we're asking them to take an 11th grade MCA test, and yet they haven't been exposed to it for a while. So how does that work when you get kids who haven't taken math? Let's say they took Calc AB, you know, sophomore year on the AP side, or they completed another science course and therefore they're done with their, you know, they took an AP course, so they're done with their credits, and yet they're taking 11th grade. How do we get kids to actually sign up for math and science 3 or 4 years in a row?
Aren't you required to take it every year?
They are required,
Yeah, because I have a son in the high school,
Yeah.
2, well, 3 now.
So so the state of Minnesota requires you to take, they'll have their 9th grade science, everybody has that, then they'll have their 10th grade biology, life science. Doesn't have to be in 9th and 10th grade, but that's how Prior Lake does it. And then to graduate, you either need to have taken physics or chemistry, one of those things. Chemistry is generally 11th grade, so generally that's how it works. The science MCA across the state of Minnesota is whenever you are taking your life science. So for us, it's 10th grade, right? So one of the things that's, I don't know if people look at unfortunate or whatever, but I'm in chemistry, so the MCA is behind me, right? So all the kids that I have already taken their science MCA and they'll never take another science MCA again. So in some respects, I have no way of knowing, at least within the context of the MCA, with this, is the stuff that we're doing, is it having this impact that we think it's having from a state standardized point of view, which could be a good thing, bad, whatever, how you look at it. With respect to your other question about just pure excitement, I guess, we've incorporated a lot more electives. To be honest, it's just more, so you're talking about biochemistry, food science, forensics, anatomy and physiology, Big Bang science, all these different electives. Even they might not be, I mean, they're science-like, but I'm just thinking about the science of learning, some neurochemistry things that are just kind of like, well, I think it'd be cool to teach this, that sort of idea. And then if it really gets accepted, then you're like, okay, I need to like actually teach this. So we're trying to find more and more ways to get kids excited about different scientific fields. In other words, having a wider variety of topics being offered.
And we've seen success with
Personal
that.
experience when I'm mentoring kids for college, they try to keep their grade point average up, so they try not to take the harder classes their junior year, and also because a lot of them try to get through calc by sophomore year, they're done with math to a certain degree, so there is, in my opinion, a little bit of a break there so that they're studying for their ACTs or whatever, they're trying to relearn algebra, sometimes they're trying to relearn what they did in pre-calc. And there's a break there, and that's, you know, it's not like I want to get rid of the class, I want to take it, you know, that sort of thing. And some of the quarter electives or half electives or whatever don't necessarily get into the critical thinking as much as we'd like them to get in a full year experiential learning. So I just, you know, from the kids that I mentor, just to be honest with you, they're trying to get rid of their harder classes, and I'd like to see them get more excited about taking math and science and taking 3 or 4 years of each one because they know it's important for their life and because it's fun, because it is something that they're getting something out of. And I'm hoping that this new method that you're talking about is going to get them more excited because they're going to be able to relate it to real life. I remember a physics teacher telling me one time, he goes, I want them to know why the pan makes that noise when they put their cookie sheet into the oven. It makes that screeching sound, you know. They should want to know. They should get curious because that's an everyday experiential thing that's going to help them for the rest of their lives in understanding how friction works, for instance. That's what I'm kind of looking forward to.
This notion of curiosity, I hope you all heard in both what we've been discussing in math and what you're hearing from the science discussion, that it's really focused on the learning of the student. It's moving more and more away from the rote memorization or approach. And it is about generating excitement through student agency and voice of their curiosity. So as they lead their learning, they have deeper knowledge. And what you're also hearing, that you heard from the math and that you're hearing from science, is that as we unwed ourselves from content, and I know you love your content, right? That's never gonna go away. But I now have transferability of my skill set. So I can take that from science and I could apply it to facts. I could apply it to math. I could apply it to, world history. That's the focus. And as we have more conversations with you as a board around global competencies and our partnership with World Savvy, that is the whole shift in education. So when we talk about going back and kind of like what is the post-COVID era of K-12 education, you're hearing the architecture of it right now. That's the focus. That's going to be our norm because kids, knowledge is at their fingertips, literally 24/7. Now, how do we teach them skill sets to appropriately interact and utilize that knowledge? That's going to be a big challenge for us as we move forward. Take maybe one more question now. I want to bring our principals up to kind of talk about overall vision of improvement and kind of what's happening at elementary and secondary from a leadership standpoint.
So speaking of architecture, and thank you, Mr. Meacham, for all your insight on that. One thing when I went to the high school and went to back to school night as a parent, and I was listening to my son's science teacher, and the one thing he mentioned is that when they start the class off, they spend time going over like a chart on the wall. That's really more of social emotional learning. It's more like and maybe you can tell us a little bit about that. What I'm trying to better understand is how much, because we only have a 6-period day in the high school, and social emotional learning is in the classroom versus in the middle school where we have an advisory period, how much time in your classroom is actually spent on that social emotional learning piece versus the content and the other aspects of science?
So the one thing I can say is that's going to be, there's not one unified approach to that. So in other words, for your son's teacher, they may have decided, or even as their kind of mini department, they may have decided like, here's what we're gonna allocate 10 minutes to that. And that may not be uniformly reflected in chemistry and or physics. However, the one thing I can say about with respect to the content is the one thing we're just realizing is if we're going to focus more time on skill development, something has to give, and that's going to be content, because it just takes longer to teach and define and assess a set of skills than it does just can you memorize this equation. Now, by focusing more time on the skill development or being cognizant of your emotional state and your social skills or lack thereof, and building those things, that's whatever the teacher or teachers are doing, they're recognizing that we have this finite currency in time, and if I only have 60 minutes with you and I'm choosing to allocate 10 or even 5 minutes of that class time, what I'm saying by doing that is that I'm recognizing as a teacher that this is valuable to help within the greater scheme of science understanding. So even though it may not be a scientific thing, right, from a content point of view, it's going to inform me as a teacher, as an educator, and you as a learner into your, because your emotional state is going to matter with respect to to what extent you're going to learn and retain and be able to think about any of the things that we're talking about here. So they may approach it different ways, but the one thing I could just say that is uniformly is if we do spend more time on placing a higher degree of emphasis on skills, which to my knowledge, every time we as a whole department come together, it seems to be the direction we're going in, something has to give. And that's been super hard because like I said, we like our content, and it's like, hey, they may not actually learn this part till college. Okay, just get over that.
But wouldn't the content be driven back to the MCAs then? I mean, that's.
It could, but some of the
part that I-
so don't get me wrong, the content that would be sacrificed has nothing to do with MCA. This would be something like, it's something that is well beyond what it's here and here, like that's.
Taking a deeper dive into.
Yes, yes, because when given the choice, a teacher will always choose to go deeper into the content. And what we're seeing now is that, okay, we're not just gonna go deeper in the content, we're gonna go deeper into the skill set. I'm recognizing that all of your conclusions are super difficult to read, to put it the nicest way possible, okay? We need to get better at writing, going back to the literacy aspect. We need to get better at communicating. What does it even look like to disagree with somebody? You can't just go up to a board and be like, that sucks. You just can't do that. How do we disagree with somebody and do it in such a way where we combat each other's ideas rather than each other's personalities and things like that. And so that is, to teach teenagers that takes more than a day, it takes more than a week, and it takes more than a unit. But in doing such things, certain content is going to get sacrificed.
I think the challenge is just, the MCA scores, it is a data point, and when you see the decline of, and I don't know, when did we start the Castle SEL program in our district? Dan, you were here?
So we introduced in a formal sense Castle in the fall of fall of 2023, the fall of 2021. But we just introduced that as an awareness. I think one of the things that to speak about that was a presentation to our secondary teachers to be paying attention to our classes' readiness for learning and making sure that they are ready to engage, as Ben just pointed out, in this debate. And I think that's one of the things, if I come back to what Paxton is teaching in her third grade classroom, when students engage in these math conversations, they, I hope, are engaging in a way that's going to set them up with the skills for that experience down the road. Now, when they get to ninth grade, they have forgotten some of those skills. As a former middle school principal, they seem to have forgotten some of those kindergarten through third grade or fourth grade skills when they come into sixth, seventh, and eighth grade. As they get to the ninth grade, they also seem to have forgotten some of those skills. So readiness for learning is something that certainly finds its way into all of our classrooms in order to access the skills.
Yeah, and I'll say that I wouldn't consider us or characterize us as a Castle district. And I'll be honest with you, Castle is not something I see as a tool being utilized uniformly throughout our district at all. Having been in a Castle-like certified district, we're not taking it to that nth degree. I do appreciate the readiness for learning aspect, which I think is very agnostic. Any good educator will get a read on the room and understand, it's off a little bit. We need to address that. So I want to let the board know, SEL, social emotional learning, and I know that has also been characterized in a lot of different ways. But you just heard probably what 95% of our staff do. That's SEL in Prior Lake Savage Area Schools. I would say that's the dominant model of SEL, period. Good educators know how to incorporate the entire beingness of a student. And so how they show up into the class, whether I leverage the Castle framework or if I leverage, something else, I'm leveraging that readiness assessment that I can read my class, I can read my individual students and figure out where I might need to slow down the instruction because we have to address the mood in the room, or we're ready to rock and roll, and on some days I can just accelerate through some things because kids are just clicking. So, that's how, yeah.
It's kind of like you described earlier, curriculum is a tool, and the teaching is the art of understanding the room, and whether you're incorporating some aspects of SEL or other softer things, you're building that environment where kids feel safe to learn.
Yeah, and it's not a thing to do. I mean, SEL is not a thing to do. It's good teaching practice to be attentive to the whole student. So I want to thank both of you for your time, and as exemplars of who sits in our classrooms, this is the talent that our kids are exposed to every single day, and I couldn't be more proud to work alongside all the thousands of employees that we have here in the district. And with that, we have a couple of principals that I would like to just bend a little perspective, if I may swap out some chairs. You guys.
Thank you for your time.
The principals will say, you asked me to come here and I don't get a chance.
Yeah, exactly. They were worried about that back there, I'm sure.
And as they're making their way forward, I will share that, and they've heard me say this, a lot of staff hear me say this, and by no means do I have hierarchies of things, but I do understand that the role of principal, and having sat in that chair for many years, and those of us who have or are, understand a lot of things evolve around that role. And that role, quite frankly, is more important than my role as superintendent, which they've heard me say many times. Because if I, as the new superintendent, or Dan, as the deputy super of instruction, wants to bring in a new science curriculum, and the principals are saying, no, this is not going to work in my school, it's dead on arrival. Or if I'm the YMCA and I want to bring this after-school program to support kids, I'm going to present it to Jennifer, and Jennifer's like, that's not really the direction I want to go. Like, they sit at the fulcrum of what's best for their learning communities. So I really respect the work that you all do, and I know that your role has gotten significantly complicated in recent years, and we know that will continue. But I would say that the leadership they provide in our schools is amazing. And I'll give the two of you a little bit of time as you think about the conversations that we've been having since the summer around some of our data and how you're leading with that data with your building leadership teams, maybe focus more there, and then maybe focus how you've structured some of that early release time to take action with your teams to address instructional performance.
We should start at the elementary, right?
I think so.
All right.
I agree.
You okay with that?
Sorry,
That's
Joe.
Not a problem.
Well, first of all, I want to say thank you for having us here this evening. And I can't say enough about what Paxton talked about tonight and the work that our teachers are doing right now. The time, the effort that they are putting into all of the things that they're doing is just incredible. And we are so fortunate to have such committed and caring teachers in our district. And I'm proud to be a part of that. Generally how our year starts out is, we spend the summer really looking into the data that we have. And that data is usually the data from last year, and it's our FastBridge data, because that is something that we have readily available in our hands. And we start looking at that, and then the leadership team comes together, and we look at our MCA data when we get that, and we look at our FastBridge data. That drives the work that we do all year in our school. And the group of us that come together decide, as we look at that, we decide what are our next steps that we're going to take as a building to help all of our students be successful. And we call it a data dig, and we really dig deeper into it and find out, where are all our students at? Where are our students in different categories, and how can we really help them move and feel great about learning, feel excited about learning, and continue to be successful. And with that, we this year we mapped out our whole year of what we wanted to look at in our building and looked at all the different subject areas and where we were going to take our students. And then we revisit that data. So after the first FastBridge data came back to us of the fall, we met together in our learning teams and talked about what that looked like. And from there, our teachers created their smaller groups to work with their students in whichever area that needed to be. It could be supporting students. It could be students that are at grade level where we want them to be, but we want to take them further. And it could be students who need a little bit more push to keep going with that. When we mapped out our school year, we talked about the early release times. We're very, very excited about the gift of having that time to really use more time to work together collaboratively through all grade levels. And so we do some vertical teaming where we can talk about where they're at in kindergarten, what does it look like in first grade, second grade, and just kind of have that whole spectrum. In our first early release day, Paxton talked about it. We brought up our FastBridge data in math, and then we looked at the new assessments that we've not been able to really look at before in our new math series. And we were able to we call it backwards mapping. What it really is you go back to the beginning of the unit, you take that post-assessment, you look at that, and then you go back and you walk through the whole unit and you look at the different things that kids are learning to make sure that you're covering everything so that your students know what they need to know and feel good about it. And we can also give more supports throughout that time because we know what the end is going to look like or what the expectations are for the end of that. So we did a lot of that for the first early release day, and then we allowed the teachers some time to do some pre-assessments to actually take it themselves and see what it was like, and a post-assessment as well. And then as we look forward to this next early release day, which is coming up here on Wednesday, we're going to dig a little bit deeper with that and look at the different skills. In our new math curriculum, we've got skills that are mastered, but we have skills that they're learning and that they continue to learn, and we call it kind of in a way, a spiraling. They're introduced to it, but then they're going to see it again in another month, in another unit, and it just continues to come up with them. And so we're really going to dig into that and look at that, and then look at our post-assessments and where our students are at, because we've all had the opportunity to take one assessment so far, and we'll be able to dig into that. We do that also with our foundations. We have assessments throughout in our foundations, which we look at that, and they come together, and teachers talk about their students and talk about, you did this, and your students were so great at that. What did you do, and how did you do that? And have those conversations to always be better. And to grow our students. So we're looking forward to the rest of the year and continuing to build upon that to help and support and collaborate each other.
Yes, do you collaborate with other admin, at JP or some of the others? Like JP has amazing MCA scores. And so I'm just curious, like as an admin, do you collaborate with them to see like what's working? What are they doing differently? I mean.
Yes, we do. So we as administrators we have weekly meetings that we talk about many different things, and our scores are one of those pieces that we talk about as well. Elementary level come together, and then we have opportunities where we come together with middle school and high school as well.
One of the things we've been really strategic about this year in planning our early release days is with that additional gift of time that Jennifer alluded to, making sure that we come together and in all 7 elementaries, we have a common outcome and goal. That each then building will certainly look at the nuances of that particular building, but we have worked toward that common experience. And again, I want to emphasize that gift of time, that to make some real-time decisions, look at the current data in front of us and say, based upon this experience, this unit assessment now, this FastBridge data that we'll have again in the winter, that we'll have again in the spring, the next unit assessment, diving in so we can make the necessary adjustments. I'm calling it real time, as in, we're not waiting in our previous model where we had 3 early release days, one in December, one in, I can't recall when it was, February, March. You know, we now have that time in front, that data in front of us, and that's what we're diving in to make sure we are collaborating on that experience so that it's consistent.
We also do some informal Built Buddies as
Yep.
well, which is partnering schools so that we're looking at promising practice, sharing those promising practices, and then systemically, when we see something that's getting traction, how do we then work to resource to scale it? So that's a universal practice. So those are protocols that I think, you know, we have, and certainly always open to making sure that we're implementing those as well.
And I think too, you know, we're a district with 7 elementary schools, which seems quite big to some extent. And I will say that this is one of the most collaborative teams I've worked on in my career. It's a really, really collaborative elementary team.
All right, Mr. Kabushek, what would you like to add?
Sure. First of all, I'll segue at the middle school. It's pretty easy to have a built buddy when you have 2 middle schools. So actually, prior to my time, right, the 2 middle schools, we have a joint built, right? So our built team is made up of teachers from both buildings talking together. So everything that we're planning and doing, we're planning and doing together. So one of the changes that we actually made last year is a transition with our learning teams to the grade level teams, which allows our teachers to come together and have a group of a math teacher, science teacher, an English teacher, social studies teacher to come together to talk about specific students. So if I'm teaching someone with Dr. Edwards, we can have a conversation of how that individual might be doing in my class, how they're doing in his class, and be able to try to figure out what types of strategies are working or might not be working for the individuals. And so one of the things that the gift of the early release has really provided for us is we are utilizing time. So with our first early release in October, we took the opportunity to really kind of map out what we wanted it to look like. And so if we were getting ready, which we did share with them, and each month we share with teachers an updated list of students that are struggling academically, students that are struggling with attendance, students that are struggling with behavior. And so they have a list of students in their grade, their group, that they can see that fit those 3 categories. And so then that starts the conversation of what students should they be talking about. And then we said, what does that conversation look like? It starts with what are tier 1 universal supports that you can provide for those students that would help the one student, but might also indirectly help all of the other students in your class. And so they, as teachers, talk about what are some things, again, going back to the example I gave before, what might be something Dr. Edwards is doing in his class that's working well. I can bring that universal support to my classroom to not only help that one student, but maybe help my entire class. We then went and are continuing to build upon if those things aren't working, what might be the next tier 2 support that we can then bring in. And then at that point we do a data collection, and then as the year goes on we'll be talking more about how does that potentially lead into a referral to our problem solving team or PST team, that where we're really digging in deep with our school psychs and everybody into those individual students. And so for our early release that we have coming this week, we're actually bringing in David Bernard, who's our instructional specialist, and he's going to be going through, again, more tier 1 universal supports for our teachers and really helping them to have that toolbox full of options and things they can select from to really help all of those students.
David Bernard was a differentiation specialist, and he was one of our more recent hires with that position. And he offered a session at the October 18th PD Day that a number of teachers participated in. It was one of those choice sessions. And the response was very favorable, and we brought that back to the middle school team, and they said, let's make that available for all of our middle school teachers. So, and that is something that, again, what this time has afforded us is those opportunities to dive deeper into those professional development, building our teachers' toolboxes that we kind of spoke about in our last conversation with the teachers up here in terms of curriculum is one tool, but there are other tools that we want to make sure to equip our teachers' toolboxes for, utilizing those.
You know, obviously, in the middle and high school, it gets a lot harder when the teachers maybe see a student for an hour or 45 minutes at most a day. So I love the idea of getting together and looking at holistically the student. But I was kind of wondering, do the teachers on a regular basis not only see the data on the student and their particular subject area and grade, or do they get a regular view of the student overall?
And so the information that we give them at the early release kind of sets the stage for the rest of the month. So every Wednesday and every following Wednesday for the rest of that month, they meet as a learning team. And again, they have the opportunity to dig deeper into those students, pulling both the data that they can pull in as an individual teacher from Infinite Campus as well as EduClimber to kind of get the overall view of that student and look at other items.
Similar to what I mentioned earlier with the implementation of FastBridge at the high school now, that data is now available for the teachers to, and it's that is something that is causing has caused already a number of light bulb moments, I'll call them, for teachers as they know more than just what their assessment data for their particular class is telling them about their student.
I have a question. You shared, thank you for all that information that you shared. So just in helping me understand the different tiers, right? When you shared that on early release days, it affords you the opportunity to discuss with other teachers. And you mentioned discussing different students and how you might support them. Supporting them in one class may help support them in all. I'm just curious if the discussions often are around academic support or behavioral support, or if it's a mix of both. And I'm curious, like, how does that affect the individual classrooms and the teacher? Because if you're having the space to have these discussions, I'm just wondering, like, how does that affect the day-to-day teaching and learning, teaching for the teachers and, the other students that might not be the topic of the conversations, if that makes sense?
Yep, good question. So the answer is both, first to the first question that you asked.
I figured
right?
that.
It is a combination of talking about academics as well as behavior, and I also mentioned attendance is another component that we bring into that, because if a student's missing a lot of school, there's a reason behind that, right? And it could be behavioral, it could be academic, it could be something unrelated to those two with outside things. So that's why we bring that one in as well. So it is both and.
Yep.
So the question is, you asked, how does that affect the day-to-day piece, right? So if I'm a teacher and I'm looking, so again, the first thing we're looking at is, like I mentioned, Tier 1 universal supports. What that means is we're doing something, the best way to describe it is, as a teacher, I'm going to go through a process of teaching you something, and I have a way that I'm planning to teach it to you. But I know that not everybody's going to understand it the one way I explain it. And so the Tier 1 universal support is, what's another thing that I could do that's going to help more students get that concept? It could be providing another activity that we do that allows students to explore that concept in a different fashion. It could be providing something as simple as, we have some students who they can understand the concepts real well. Maybe they're just struggling with some of the vocabulary, which was a term that was mentioned earlier. So maybe it's an audio version of a text where they're able to listen to it. And if they listen to it, they know exactly what they're supposed to do. If they were asked to read it by themselves, they're going to struggle with that. But if they were given the opportunity to listen to it, it's going to help them. So now that's another student that initially might not have been able to be up to speed because I provided an option of an audio, or I read it to the class instead, I read that little text. Suddenly I have more students who have an understanding. And so that's really what that tier 1 is. It's something that is available to all students, could benefit all students. You might not need it, but I might need it. And so that's kind of that description of that tier 1. When we start to get into tier 2, that's where we start to say we've tried these options that are things that are available to all students, and that's still not working. We're still having something that's missing. So we need to do something that's going to be a little more intentional or focus on that student or a skill or a trait. And so it's kind of a, does that answer your question?
Well,
I
I
think
think the other piece is, if I can ask a different way. So we talk a lot about targeting kids who are demonstrating a certain type of need, academic need, behavioral need, attendance need. And with our focus being there, what about the kid who already knows it? What about the kid who doesn't really show up on the radar and all of our attention is here, but nobody's looking at this? And then that student might backslide, into that. I think I'm hearing some of that into the question.
Because I'm kind of wondering, obviously it's wonderful that those supports are in place for the students that need it. I love that. But I'm wondering if that slows everything, if that slows things, or if that could be causation to the decreased test scores. I don't know that those correlate.
Yeah, so I would just speak to the balance of how you uphold kids who are thriving and doing well.
Yep, I understand what you're saying.
With the level of intensity
And so,
of.
yep, so you're asking, is that causing the class to slow down, right? It was one of the questions that was asked earlier of, we know we have the standard, as a teacher, we always want to go deeper, right? And you're asking the question of, by doing that, is it slowing us down or inhibiting us from potentially going deeper? Because we have the students that, again, if I'm providing 2 samples of how I'm explaining the concept, there's going to be students who understand it the very first, I got it, and the second time I go through it, it's a review for them, right? And the answer is, we always are providing additional opportunities for those students to continue to grow and excel. And so those universal supports are not designed to be slowing down the class. What they're actually doing is they're designed to help those students keep up with the other students that are in the class so the class itself can continue moving forward. They're not designed for slowing the class down, because we do want to make sure that we're always looking at, because while our learning teams and our grade level teams are talking about the first ones on their radar are certainly the kids that are struggling, right? That doesn't mean that's the only students that they talk about. Sure. And so they're having conversations around all of their students and the students that are excelling, and they're saying, when they bring a student forward to have a conversation about, part of it is, I have this student in my class and they're doing really well in my class, and I don't know how to continue to challenge them. Sure. What are some things that you are doing in your class to continue to challenge this student?
How long is, sorry, were you done? Or did you have?
Go right
I'm
ahead.
wondering how long the tier system has been in place in her district.
Well, MTSS has been around for a number of years in a variety of formats. It previously was called RTI, Response to Intervention. MTSS called Multi-Tiered Systems of Support, including expanding upon the RTI, focused primarily on academics, but now other components have come into the MTSS model, that the data points that were referenced here. So I think that what we have increased our, what I'll call intensity around, with the notion of the differentiation specialist position that we've spoken about around this table for a few sessions here, is bringing those skills and opportunities for teachers to, again, back to that toolbox, work with people who can support their development of more tools, like Joe just pointed out. I have certain members of my class who do seem to get it the first time around. how do I continue for their learning to grow and develop? And working with our differentiation specialists and their colleagues in their learning teams as well. So one of the things that Joe didn't mention, but in addition to those grade level teams, we do have a structure in place where once a month at the middle school level specifically, the teams are coming together from a content area as well to share some of that work with their colleagues too. So I think there are, similar to multi-systems of support for students, we also have to be thoughtful about the building up the capacity of our teachers through those.
So you shared that the tiered support has kind of morphed from different things in the past, but can you pinpoint or give me a guesstimate of when that kind of support entered the district? Has it kind of always been there?
I would say,
Always,
yeah,
probably always, in some way, shape, or form.
In some form,
Okay.
I would say it got catapulted in the late 90s.
Okay.
When
So
Rick and Becky DeFors started Solution Tree and Pyramid of Interventions, RTI, all of this really kind of got a big research base behind it. It's been around for decades, and it's been called something different every 10 years.
Yeah.
So.
And I would say that we, you know, as we have implemented as a district, PBIS, at all of our sites in the behavioral intervention side of things, positive behavior intervention system, is a component of that, and that's been around for about 10 years on the behavioral side of things. Again, we're looking at the academic side that goes back to Dr. Thomas's point for many, many years, but we continue to need to grow in our skill around each of those areas.
So, you know, as we, I'm sorry, go
Oh,
ahead.
I just have a question that kind of adds on Amy's question. It's a quick question though. So as you get to that PS level, problem solving level, are you then partnering with parents and potentially could that turn into a 504 plan for that
Yep,
student?
absolutely, and that's what the
So-
problem-solving team does, is so we bring in, at that point, we're bringing in, I mentioned the school psych before, we bring in the special education team lead, and so we start looking at, is there a concept, is there a need potentially for a special education referral? That is sometimes an option, it's not always a result. You mentioned 504 could be a result as well, and so yes, parents are a part of that process.
Thank you. And then the last, I have just another quick question. I know there's been one big change in the middle school regarding the cell phone use, and I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit about that and how, if you're seeing any, getting any feedback, seeing any
Yep, so
results from that
initial,
from a distraction standpoint.
Yeah, I would say initial conversation with staff is they very much are noticing, you know, engagement in their classroom. Because it's just a blanket, this is the way it is, teachers aren't, while there are always going to be minor things here or there, as a whole, they've said the compliance piece has been very strong by students. And again, that's both in the classroom and it's in the hallways during the class period, for example, right? So if I'm walking the halls and I see students, you know, it used to be where a student would be walking the halls, that's not the case anymore, so.
That's wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah, you know, I would say as we close down this segment of this portion, you know, as you're looking at data, and I'm hearing from a couple of you, you're trying to find like, what's the thing that changed, right? And I get that. I mean, there's going to be a longing for understanding that, and there's no one thing that changed. There's a lot of different things. A lot of environmental things have changed. Demographics have changed. You know, so there's a host of things. We can't externalize and look out there. We can certainly say that there's some correlations to how kids are showing up that are fundamentally different. But they're in our schools, they're in our classrooms. We can't control that, but we can control the conversations that you've heard tonight. And that's what really is exciting to me, is that our staff are really engaged in how they're focusing and shifting on the kind of the total learning experience, getting away from maybe a very prudent approach of educational practices in the past that might have worked for our generation. But our generation, through advances with technology, access to, knowledge, things are different. Learner profiles have shifted. So our practices have to shift to align to meeting those needs. So the thing about continuous improvement, and I promise this is it. This is like my third closing, right? As the Baptist minister. The continuous improvement focuses on improvement continuously. You never arrive. Because the belief is that, and this is go back to your point, Director Bullion, a kid who's up here, we don't just say, okay, Amy's good. Like, Amy needs to be challenged continuously. So that's where our focus as a district is really moving towards. And kids on the entire spectrum of kids who really need a lot of support to kids who already know it, coming twice, 3 times gifted. So how do we meet that varied needs of our kids? And that's what excites our administration, our staff, and what will engage our conversations with this board in our community. Because scores might be stagnant, learning is not. So thank you.
Yeah. Can I just ask one quick question? I know we don't, I'm in from the business world, we do goal setting, we set, different projects to meet goals.
Yep.
But when we look in the past, when we were at 75, 80% proficiency, now we're in the 40s and 50s. How do you set a goal? Like, how do you monitor it very closely, like on a monthly basis? I mean, that's where I'm trying to understand, it's hard for me to believe that in 2 years, we're gonna be back at 80%.
Yeah, I mean,
because
obviously.
once you've fallen, it's really hard to climb back up, so.
We are seeing,
so
one of the conversations that we'll be bringing forward to the board here is our new scorecard system. And I think I've alluded to that a couple of times. And it goes back to this whole, what are we measuring and how are we measuring what matters most? Because there's a million data points that we could be looking at. And so yes, what we will be proposing to the board will be a large strategic scorecard matrix that then all continuous improvement gets back mapped from there. So if this is what we're trying to hit, what does that look like at a school level? And then Jennifer will say, okay, at our school, this is what we need to contribute. You will probably recall Patrick talking about this in this presentation last year. I mean, this is kind of the process that he was speaking to when he was one of our first schools featured. But then Jennifer's gonna break that down for each grade level. And then within each grade level of this larger goal, she's talking with individual teachers. Right now, I would say that our system is a bit fragmented. And there's a lot of hard work going on. Folks are rowing the boat. We might not be rowing all in the same direction. And so when we bring in this scorecard, I think it'll be our North Star of what we're all striving for. And then everyone has a responsibility for contributing to delivering on that. So more to come with you. And this is the work that we're doing in partnership with Studer that I mentioned. That's kind of all going to be rolled into our new strategic plan with that strategic scorecard at the center. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I just wanted to make a comment. I hope we never teach just to the MCA. And overall, our scores are a couple places lower, but we're still far above the state. But still, learning is learning. And if you teach to the MCA, the student suffers. So it's just a data point.
Agreed.
All right, thanks for that robust discussion. Thanks to all our wonderful staff coming in today to teach us some things, a lot of things. Now we'll go on to our 23-24 enrollment update and final budget. And so this is just a report from TME on where we're at with enrollment.
Yes, so the enrollment report is one that you've seen before. It's the enrollment as of October 3rd. We have an October 1st official enrollment number. I just want to be real transparent about it, that the way that the official October 1st enrollment works at Department of Education is they were counting every student that's enrolled as of October 1st, but we have until the middle of December to actually report them. So as teachers get caught up with their attendance and we get all the data into, from Infinite Campus into Mars, our official October 1st count could change slightly just because we're catching up with all of the kind of data as it comes in. But they have to be enrolled as of October 1st. We just have a little extra time to report them.
What was that December date, Amy?
I think it's like December 15th, but it goes in on the end of year Mars report, which is actually due January 5th.
Tammy, what we have right now is student counts. In December, is it going to be ADM? Or is it going to be just physical student in a seat at all during this semester?
So what I'm counting on here is physical, we can calculate the ADMs are just, well, they're always going to change it by the end of the year. You're going to have different numbers.
Right, that's why I was curious, because this is going to be a physical student, not the average daily.
Right,
And,
so,
okay.
yes, and
Because it's
MDE
gonna-
doesn't do official final for 2 years. So right now, in January, we'll see the actual final numbers for 2020
Right.
or 2021. Because they're just, it takes them a while to get everything caught up and calculated. The final budget, I'm not anticipating any changes in the general fund. I will be bringing some changes for the community ed fund in November. Director Joel Dahl and I are working on getting some analysis done on what their budget is going to be able to look like for this year as we move forward. But we're just trying to finalize a couple numbers. And then food service, there is going to be, we have the likelihood that we're going to get 2 grants, but we haven't officially gotten them yet. We should have them very shortly, so I'll include those as we submit the final budget for in November at the board meeting.
Any other questions for Tammy on enrollment or budget discussion before we get into the forecast? Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, the enrollment numbers are based upon using projections going forward initially. Do we get any additional data during this time on census for our county, district, state, anything like that that could influence this, that would be a point in time?
It's a possibility. I did go in, actually Department of Health, and I looked at some of the census data. They haven't really published the final numbers. They're still working on them. So as I looked at them, I would rather wait till they have a little better updated numbers than what they currently have out there. But it's possible, yeah, it could influence some of this.
Thank you. Let's move on to the 5-year forecast, if everybody's ready for that discussion. And Tammy, I know some of this work came out of the committee meeting last week, I think it was. Do you want to give some context there?
Sure. We had given the initial report, I think I sent everybody a copy of the initial 5-year forecast. We presented it to the Finance Advisory Committee and asked for feedback. We did get some suggestions, and I did revise a few things on here. We've added a couple more tables to some of the projections, just at different, kind of a conservative, a moderate, and a best case scenario. The first table on here, table 1A, is basically what it looks like right now if we were to make no changes. It's assuming that our referendum will end in fiscal year '29. And I'm also assuming a formula allowance increase of 2%. And then I went and changed for table 1B. I assumed that the referendum would be renewed at the current amount, which the board, according to the new legislation, is allowed to do without voter approval. I assumed the formula increase of 2.25% in 27 and 2.5 in 28 and 29. So it changed some of those numbers in fiscal year 29. And then table 1C, I assumed that we would pass a referendum at the amount that we're allowed in statute with an inflationary factor, and again, use the same percentages for the formula allowance increase. And I'm assuming that that referendum would be in FY26 rather than wait until fiscal year 29 when it expires. The enrollment, and I have a table in the appendix. You've all seen the enrollment projections. We use a 3-year weighted average as we look at the projections. We haven't seen a change in the trend of declining birth rates, and we also have an aging population in our community. We have seen some incremental declines during COVID, and they seem to be on the rebound. We're kind of holding steady, but they certainly aren't at our pre-pandemic levels. We are assuming in this that there will be a 2% change in the state aid formula beginning in 25 and 26. For the sake of calculations, I'm assuming a 2.25 in fiscal year 27 and 2.5 in 28 and 29. The state has tied the state aid formula to inflation, not to exceed 3% a year. Also, the compensatory revenue is also tied to the Gen Ed formula. We're going to continue to see a cross-subsidy in special education, even though the recent legislation changed the amount of the cross-subsidy aid. It used to be 6% is about what we were getting for cross-subsidy aid. They changed it in 24 to 44%, and then 25 and later it's 50%. But we'll still be having about a $4 million every year that we will continue to invest in supporting special education cross-subsidy. The expense assumptions, I assume 2.5% increase on all the wage contracts. I am also assuming about a 1% vacancy rate, and that's about half of what it was last year. So we will see some savings for continued vacant positions. It is important to note that our teacher vacancies are not nearly what they have been. The majority of what our vacancies have been looking like this year have been more in food services and kids company. So I think a 1% vacancy rate is probably reasonable for what we're looking at as we move forward. I'm also assuming about between a 1% and 2% increase for inflationary factors for services, supplies, and equipment. That is probably a very conservative number, but it's important to remember that we build our budget based on what our revenue expenses look like. So if our revenue doesn't increase and we have extreme inflationary increases like in electricity, we have to adjust other expenses to offset that. We also were assuming that our health and dental insurance isn't going to significantly increase. That is a risk that if it does, then the assumptions in this report will be have to be adjusted. As I said, we see our revenue continuing to decline, but all of our costs are going to be continuing to go up for our foreseeable future. There has been this chart, the general education formula allowance, adjusted for inflation, has been seen in a lot of a lot of different presentations. AMSD shows it, MSBA, there's a lot of different organizations that look at this report. If we had been able to keep up with inflation in the general ed formula allowance, we would have about $13 million more than what we currently have. Just see, it's a huge increase. We have about 1,400 students that open enroll from other districts, and we have about 860 students who choose to open enroll elsewhere. So even getting all of those students back is not going to have a significant increase to solve our structural imbalance as we move forward.
Tammy, can I ask where, when you say the 860 students, the chart that you sent me has it broken out by open enrollment out, which I'm assuming is students who go to other districts or charter, because that's what it says. And last year it was like 789. And then private school is 717, and homeschool was 228. That was as of last year. Where is that 800, what piece of that, of the 860 are you accounting for?
I'm not including non-publics or homeschool. We're unlikely to get any of those students back.
So you're not including homeschool or the private school?
Correct.
Okay, just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Even bringing back 500 students will increase our revenue about $3.5 million, which still, as you look forward to our revenue projections in fiscal year 28, that's still not going to solve our structural issues. We continue to pay for all of our programs that we continue to have. Again, if we can make decisions to look at some of the programs that we are currently funding. I'm sorry, I just lost my place. The fourth finding that we found was that our financial sustainability can't be achieved just by reducing expenditures or increasing the enrollment. 84% of our expenditures are salary and fringe, and there's limited reductions that we can make in expenses. We have things like transportation costs, utilities, curriculum adoption, our software license renewals, and our insurance that continue to increase. We really can't do anything about those. They're kind of legacy cost, if you will. So the only other avenue that we really have to increase any referendum or increase our revenue is by a voter-approved referendum. We are allowed by statute to ask for a voter-approved referendum of $1,770.50 per pupil. And you also can ask for an inflationary factor in that. We are currently at $623.97 per pupil unit without an inflationary factor.
Tammy, I have another question about that. Because I was going through your report and I went back and read some newspaper articles, and I know newspaper articles are not always accurate, but it was stating that in 2017 the referendum dollar amount was $924, I believe. That was passed. 924 was in 2017.
So that includes $300 for the local optional revenue, which is actually not voter approved, it's board approved. So that's separate. Every district can approve a $300 local optional levy without voter approval. So the actual operating referendum that is allowed in statute is $2179.50, but they back off the $300 for the local optional for everything to get to the $1,779.50.
But when we went to the voters, we were asking them for the 924. Is that correct? Because that's what I read in the paper.
We asked for $623.97, and then
okay,
there's
then maybe the paper quoted it wrong. I know I saw your name, Director Berneck, several times quoted, and so I don't know if you
It would include that $300 of local option.
I wasn't a director back then, so I wouldn't have been.
Oh, I'm sorry, but I think you were part of the,
I was never quoted, but let's pull that up. in a minute.
oh, that's okay. No, I wasn't, I just, like I said, I saw your name on some finance reports and stuff like that, so,
In 2017.
I'm just trying to get an understanding, like, if we approved 924, and like I said, back why we were stating 623, I was just trying to get an understanding of what the dollars were. What was that?
We didn't approve 924, they actually knowingly approved less than what the operating levy should have been, and with no inflationary factor. The 924 was added in per the optional, just because of the total tax impact, but the tax impact was only affected by the 600. So that was, I'm not sure what you're reading, but that was a misstatement, and it was actually corrected, I believe.
Yeah, I'll send you what I
Yeah.
saw. I saw a couple things yesterday when I was going through it.
I remember the
I know.
voting, and it was
Yep.
too low for what we would have needed to spend. That was pretty obvious.
Yeah, the last page of this report actually shows, and this came from MDE, shows what every district has. The
Yeah,
first
I saw
column is what the voter approved is, and we're $623.97. And then the local optional is $300, and then they have an adjustment or a equity factor that other districts can ask for $424. So the only thing that's voter approved is the $623.97.
Okay, because I was just trying to get an understanding of it.
And then I would just like to ask for clarification.
Yeah.
I would like to make sure that your statement wasn't that I misquoted something.
No,
or that
no,
you
it wasn't.
misunderstood
I saw
it.
your name on,
Just clarifying things.
yeah, no. Like I said, I saw your name, so I was just like, oh, Director Burnett was part of this,
No, it
or,
wasn't.
okay, but like I said, I'll look it up and I'll send it to you. It doesn't, I'm just trying to get an understanding. I was actually gonna call you and ask you some questions about it because I wasn't clear on the difference of the numbers, but I thought I would just ask you.
I would direct you to our finance director.
Yeah,
at that
okay.
point.
There is actually a spreadsheet on the MD website that shows referendum for every district. You can pull it up, and it clearly says $623.97 is what our voters approved. If we had asked for the full amount, we would be seeing an additional $11 million in our district, which is, when you looked at those tables at the beginning, that's what is included in Table 1C. So again, this 5-year forecast is kind of showing what our trajectory looks like if we don't make any changes and if we don't change our assumptions. I mean, we can have discussion about what the assumptions are and whether they should or should be changed. I think just keeping in mind that if we increase anything in our expenditure side, we're not